8. All right, dude.
I think we're going.
Impromptu live. I was just asked to do this like hours ago. I've been at my desk.
That's accurate.
I did as good as I could possibly do on this, so bear with us. It is Lighting Showdown 2023. We're going to go through like 50 different lights, not today. We're going to show you, basically, you know what you're going to get today? Is all the highlights. Like you could skip all the other episodes probably for the most part.
Take it all from the light.
And you could get it in this one right here, the condensed format. Those things are all going to have all the data in them. Your typical BRStv investigates all the data, just crunch it however you like. But like I just hate the fact that sometimes we like hide all the findings at the end and there's no interpretation of it. And I think that there's been huge innovations in lighting. I think that if we adapt them, we'll probably be more successful.
Well, if you want to nerd out, go for the series. Otherwise, we're just going to do it all right now.
All right, so where did this come from? Well, we're working on a new light. It's going to launch in the future and tested it in a billion different ways. And what I found was that in all the new testing, what's the point of testing if they're not tested against anything else?
Exactly.
So how many different lights are we testing, do you know?
I don't. How many is it? I know it's quite a few. Is it all?
It's like 54 different light
Yeah,
configurations.
it's almost all of the ones I can think of.
All right. So this time, we're going to test them for something totally different. It's kind of similar, but pushing it like way, way harder, right? Okay, so the first one here is obstruction of light. All right, so obstruction of light means what? Shadows?
Shadows. That's
All
all
right.
it is.
All right, so that's going to come in the form of this thing. You're going to see more about this today. But it's a big shadow apparatus, all right? So you were a little bit of a naysayer in whether it matters now, but what do you think now?
I was. I completely changed my mind.
All right, so wait and see if you change your mind as well. Positioning of light. This is one where we decide how high they mount the light. And one of the things you're going to find is efficiency and even distribution are totally at odds with each other. And how do we find the sweet spot where they meld together? You're going to find that out today too. And the color potential of light. This is one of my favorites. People just don't know this, but
So I was one of the people who really didn't know a lot about this, and I've learned a ton just from the, like you said, a handful of hours planing this. I've learned a ton about it.
Okay, yeah, I think that almost nobody understands the color potential of light and the difference between this yellow-brown one and this blue-green fluorescent one, and that it might not actually have anything to do with the coral, and it's actually about the light. If you don't have the light to illuminate the fluorescence or the color pigments, you just don't get them.
And it turned out to be extremely simple.
Very, very simple. I know, that's not the funny part. All right, and then there's cost of light episode as well. You're gonna get to see a sneak peek of that as well today. But there's 50 some different lights, and if you could make them out there, you could probably get them all. They're pretty tiny though. But the cost of light, some lights cost almost 3 times as much as other lights for the same amount of par. Not like, is it a $300 light or is it a $600 light or what is it, but like it's par output that we're looking for in most cases. So how do we take the average par and divide it by the cost to find out how much this thing actually costs? You're gonna see that some of them are as little as $1.87 a par, and some of them are actually way, 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 way more expensive than that, like 2.5 times. Distribution of light. So we'll go and dig in not only just how like how much par there is, but how it behaves inside of the tank. Blending of light. We don't actually hit on this one today, but this is disco. You know, this is not just like the biology of the animal and how does it want to get flashes of like spectrum hotspots, but flashes of spectrum hotspots looks like what in the tank?
Exactly what you can see right there, disco ball. So it's this one's actually really important to me when I'm purchasing a light. You know, if you're standing on a lake or the ocean, you can see the ripples and you can see the little beams of light in the ripples of the water, so not just underneath the surface. But I mean, there's no natural look to that.
The shimmer and stuff is like the final frontier, like of lighting. Like, okay, now it's providing biology, but how do we make it look nice as well? And here's the reality: is we're doing with a spectrometer, and we're taking a shot like every couple of seconds, 20 of them. If the spectrometer can catch it, like 20 frames a second or a minute or whatever it is, like your eye's gonna be able to catch it for sure. So what we catch on the spectrometer is actually what you're gonna see in the tank too. So biology or just because you care what the tank looks like, it doesn't matter, either one. Now you'll find out. Use of light. This is an interesting one because in the past, a lot of people will tell you, hey, you should buy this light, you should buy that light. Usually it's the brand that I bought and used for myself, you know. It's just like the purchase loyalty, you know. Work for me, must work for everybody. But I see all the time people recommending like a, you know, $900 SPS light for somebody's frog spawn.
Exactly. Well, and it's, you know, it's so easy to set it up and have it go really well and then recommend it. It's equally as easy to not set it up correctly and have a poor experience and then not recommend that same light. It's just, it's all about knowing how to use it.
I think that this is the right tool, right job, and the easiest possible way to save money on lights is actually just to not like buy 800 horsepower for a car that only needs 100.
Right.
You know? Per and quality of light. Okay, this one we are going to hit today, and it's spectrum. And if you just tuned out because I don't know what the hell spectrum means, because I don't think most people really understand it, for the first time, I think that you're probably going to really get what the difference is between good, better, and best.
Yep. If you asked me before we had to discuss today, I wouldn't have an answer.
I can tell you, I've been working on this for 20 years, man. So like telling the story and understanding it is a really, really difficult thing. But it isn't just how much par or punch you have, it's per. And like I haven't actually heard per explained in a way that's actually that valuable. It's like the conceptual component of it is important. But today I think we're going to get into a way that actually somebody could digest it and understand what good looks like.
I've heard people talk about per the same way people talk about ORP.
Yeah, exactly. Like conceptually, but what do I do with that?
Yep,
yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. All right, and so what that's going to look like, by the way, is spectrum charts. We're going to give you distinct graphs and stuff attached to it. All right, so I lost you there one more time. All right, one of the things, though, that I really want everybody to tune in today on is a thing that we call the law, or not, well, this is actually a law, well-established thing, law of diffusion of innovation or adoption theory. Okay, the reason that I really want you to focus on this is because what we're testing is 8 types of different innovation. And if we want to get this stuff over the edge and have the things that we're learning get into the public knowledge and get out of some of the ruts, because some of the stuff we're stuck on. Like we haven't gotten over the laws of innovation. And what that looks like is there's innovators here. And you guys will know exactly which one of you are, and I feel like sometimes depending on the different thing, I might be a different one of these at different times. But innovators, these are people who are open to risks, excited to take new ideas. They're 2.5% of you guys. That LEDs came out, and the first thing you did is got everyone you got your hands on. All right, early adopters. Community thought leaders who recognize the need to change, recognize a need to change, very comfortable adapting to new ideas. Plausible theory is good enough. Plausible theory is as good as fact.
I just like to tinker, so that's where I sit.
I find myself that way in many places as well. But like this is the time, man, that like all these people are not really that afraid of risk, and they're willing to take risk for everybody else, right?
Yep.
This is the point, and the reason I'm sharing this is where this is broken. Like on the spectrum one, there isn't enough information out there to know what good looks like, that the early adopters can pass it on to the early majority. Because the early majority are those who pave the way for the rest of innovation within the hobby, but they need to see evidence that the innovation works before they're willing to adopt it. I know a ton of you out there, just raise your hand. You need to see evidence that it's working before you're willing to adopt this thing from the early adopters, right? Okay, here's the problem, man. If you never do it, and the early adopters never able to give these people the information, we'll never get to late majority, and we'll end up in the Laggards. These people, if they still made rotary phones, we wouldn't have cell phones.
Still on halides. I'm a halide guy.
Your best tank was actually on halides.
It was.
It's true.
It was.
They say actually that sometimes the Laggards are people that have something that works, like for me, T5s, right? But they only get off of that technology because they're all curmudgeons, like T5 curmudgeons like myself, only get off of that when you actually take the tool away. So if you take away the rotary phone or the Betamax, well, I have to move.
Well, and everything has pros and cons, right? The halide is just, it's so hot.
Yep.
It's unbearably hot to run.
But there's no bulbs now.
And finding bulbs.
Yeah,
there's
now
no selection of bulbs.
Bulbs are gone. So like they took it away. The rotary phone's gone, man. I guess I get a cell phone. All right, so this is what we're asking you. most of you that are still here waiting or listening to this live are thinking, or who you are, is the early adopters and the early majority. You are like the DNA of reefing. You're the people that push all the innovation over the edge. And what we're doing here with all of these 8 tests is testing the innovation, like the amount of effort that goes into creating a light that looks good in your house, looks good in the corals, and provides for the biology of the animals. So keep that in mind. And like I would love for you guys to give feedback, in the comments, whether or not you think that these things are true innovations and we're measuring it, or if we're like behind the curve, or if only we could push this thing over the edge and have it adopted by everybody.
Right.
Find some success. All right, so obstruction of light, shadow test. Shadow test looks like this. We put a big giant plate in the center of the tank. Light is mounted at the BRS optimal height for that light. Got a couple of bars, and you have a big giant shadow underneath the tank, right? You have a big giant shadow from each one of these bars, and you even have some ancillary ones coming off of the reflections off the glass. I can see the BRStv shining through the acrylic on the top, right? This is a heavy shadow, right? Okay. And just to give you relevance of what that means, okay, this is out front where it's not shadowed. We got 104 par with this light. Underneath the shadow, 24. We lost 75% of the light.
Before today, I would have guessed max 20% because of the light bouncing off the glass. I could not believe it was such a huge drop.
75%. Okay, this is the one that surprised me. When we put it underneath the little rod here, it dropped to 51, which is half of the par in the open water. So here's what, like, for me, man, basically this plate is mimicking either big plating corals, the aquascape, coral growth. Whereas these bars are actually in some degrees mimicking the actual pieces of the acropora, and the branching of even a torch or anything.
Yeah, so that was my first question, is like, what is the relevancy of this when you first showed me? And that's exactly it. So it's not only the coral shadowing other coral, it's the coral shadowing itself. And you can see both here.
Dude, it is going to look like this. Okay, so this is a not uncommon image that you would see. And like, your eye adjusts for a lot of things, but the camera doesn't. Right? And so when you shoot a picture of a coral, I mean, look how much of this coral is shadowed. And this is a well-lit tank, right? It shadows itself. And you can see inside of all of this tissue that, like, it's just not getting light in the same way, and the camera's representing that. Okay, so why does this really matter? Like, a good friend of mine asked this question the other day, and I gave him this answer, was think DLI. And so for those of you who don't know what DLI means, it's daily light intervals. Basically, you're saying you can run the light, stronger for less time, or lower par for a longer time. So, 300 par for 4 hours is roughly the same as 150 par for 8 hours, right? Just increase it. But, like, we're just kind of photons in that case. But here is the piece that, like, I think a lot of people miss when you're thinking about shadows, right? When I think about shadows, DLI, we're counting the number of photons that are hitting it, right? What happens when I shadow half of the cup, right? And I'm covering up half the cup. It's going to get half the amount of photons.
Right.
This is its energy. This is how it survives.
It's a much simpler way to look at it. But if you asked me before today, again, I don't know.
Yeah, because it's just a shadow, man. Like, what am I, a marine biologist?
I don't know. The rest of it's getting light all day.
Okay, so let's put it this way. Basically, this thing is capturing calories. It's going to create glucose and glycerol for the coral to survive, right? Okay, so what if I put like 4 candy bars out in front of you? It has like a known, like probably 1,000 calories, right? And you could eat those things every day. But I shaded half of them and said now you could only eat half of the candy bars in the shadow.
Doesn't sound pleasant.
But you get half the calories for sure.
I'm used to all of them.
Yeah, okay. So like, you just got to think about it that way when you're thinking about shadows. And this is a way to give contextually, like, why it is tanks that are just blanketed in light do so much better than those that don't. And like, I had somebody shrug their shoulders at me, like, oh, well, whatever, the other day. I'm like, okay, dude, that drives me absolutely batty, because you're the same person that's going to come to me later and say, well, how come my tank doesn't look like everybody else's? The corals just grow, the bases are all dead, and I keep having problems.
Well, especially long term, anyone can grow a frag, right? I mean, we're talking about a tiny little stick that doesn't shadow anything, whether it's itself or any other part of the tank. It's that the multi-year success that we always talk about. That's what this is helping with.
Okay, and we say all the time, I guess, like you could start with something weak with tiny little frags and eventually add lights on, and that's a path, but nobody ever does that. Because it seemed like it worked for the first year, and might as well, like, what do you wait until stuff dies? Like, preemptive, like, think about where we're going, not where we're starting, right? All right, so just to give you a reference point, this is what we found. You know, we tested 50 some lights. I'm not going to give you all, but like almost all of them fall inside of this pocket, right? Okay, so this is an AI prime. So an AI prime is a focused, you know, fairly focused lens. You know, it has lenses on there that focus the light down, so it goes down a little deeper. All right, and you can mount it a little bit higher than other lights. I think this one was around 12, 14 inches. Okay, so what it does though is it creates, it's a small, you know, light the size of a silver dollar, but it creates a bunch of shadows in the tank. End of story. It just does that. Okay, to the point that I can even see the TV through it. This is going to be indicative of most lights that come in this really small form factor. It's just like nothing you can do. I mean, it's just real. Embrace it, accept it. You didn't see it before, but now that you've seen it, you can't unsee it, you know.
No matter how much power, no matter how many diodes, if it's in that small area, you just always end up with this.
Well, you know, not to the same degree, actually, right?
Oh.
Okay, so here's the Kessel. So the Kessel, actually the form factor is actually smaller, right? And the light is actually closer. So the shadow changes quite a bit. Because it's closer to the obstruction, the shadow actually got significantly bigger, which makes it a little bit dimmer, or I guess like less impactful shadow, and it's spread out more. Because this super wide angle light is also catching reflections off of the glass to mute it. So it's not just sitting right above the plate trying to wrap around it. It's, you know, leveraging the environment it's in, which is a glass box. Right?
I was surprised at how minimal the shadow was from such a small point. You know, because I mean, think of Kessel. A Kessel is all those diodes on a single chip.
It's literally a quarter size.
Yeah, right, it's the size of a quarter, and it's doing such a good job of reflecting it from in the light from its own reflector. Then you can see that clearly when you see these two slides.
Now, if it wasn't in a glass box, if we were testing this like in air, it would probably have one of the harder shadows.
Right.
But because it's leveraging the environment it's in, which is a glass box, it's a little bit different. Also, there are things like ultra wide, like medium sized modules, you know, like the XR30. Okay, so this thing, you can barely see the shadows all over it. And you know, the interesting part is you can't see the shadow in the middle the most, but you can still see the legs a little bit. Okay, why do you think that is?
Because it's got to be with the reflections, right?
It sure is.
Okay, I'm glad I got that one because you didn't give me all the answers.
I know, for those who don't know, we rushed right into this, so hopefully all these slides make sense. I have 2 hours to prepare for this. Okay, so this is a laser beam that we shot from above the tank. Hits the glass and bounces back into the center. That is why the ultra-wide angle, like HEI2 lenses, don't have a shadow, even though this plate is probably not all that much smaller than the actual like light source itself, but you don't see the shadows. So leveraging the glass, you know, helps a lot when you're trying to eliminate shadows. And so a lot of this stuff, when we're talking about innovation here, and we're talking about like, how do we, you know, get this out of all the manufacturers out there? You know, how does everybody grasp the fact this is a glass box? Let's leverage it. Let's not try par wars and get as much focused par down to the bottom as humanly possible. All right. So there is another way to do this, which, you know, honestly, I thought would have worked better than this. And this is true of almost any of the lights. You would think that if you got two, because this is the way that we do these modules, right? You get two of them, and then you space them out. You'd think that it'd get better for coverage.
If I need more light, I'm going to add two. I'm going to space them. If I want more light, I'm going to add three. I'm going to space them.
Well, it kind of works. What it does is take what would have been a large plate and shrinks it down into a smaller plate, right? And it also creates a bunch of other like tertiary shadows on here, right? So it kind of works, but not as good as I would thought, because each one of these things are literally on the side of this, you know, obstruction plate. You would think that it would it would do differently.
That was very surprising. With the way the lights are spaced, and they still don't cover, regardless of what the light is, 2 lights spaced apart like those were, and you still have this much shadowing. It's very surprising.
All right. So what if we go to 4 lights, right, instead of 1? And this is one we talk about all the time, the difference of having 4 AI primes versus 1 Hydra 64. And it's more of that, which is, yeah, I don't have this big giant square that's in the bottom from the focus lenses, but I have like a lot of new shadows, because these things are basically covering a 1-inch grid on over the top of it, and it's just creating not that heavy of a shadow in the center, but tons of them all over the place. Okay, so this is the way, when I'm talking about innovation again, this is the way that we've like been walking. It's like, all right, so we got these small little modules now, they're attractive and easy to mount, whatever, like, all right, but how do we use them to get the same performance we got in older technology? Like, all right, well, let's pack more of them together, you know, like we're told 24 inches, let's make them 18, let's make them 12, let's make them 6, let's stack them on top of each other.
I've got 12 plugs and 2 power strips.
Yeah, okay. So I guess that works, you know, but I mean, that's like over a tank, like at 120, that would be like 8 quarts, right?
Right.
All right, there is a different way. And, you know, a lot of people have talked about it, but it's called a 3-point lighting. So this is 3-point lighting is taken from like photography, where you have a primary light that's focused on the subject, in this case the aquascape, and then it creates shadows, and then you use fill light in the front and the back to, you know, fill in the spaces and eliminate all the shadows from it. Okay, this is 3 lights here. This is the Kessel. You remember the Kessel had that big square down there, now filled in with the coral cover from Aquatic light. So this is a primary light with 2 fill lights going in the back. And we see this whether it be T5s, whether it be the coral cover LED or any of the other strips and stuff. 100 out of 100 times, man, if you take the primary light and you put front and back fill light on it, it evenly reduces all the shadows. And it doesn't create like in this case, you know, I had 4 lights and I created all these tons of other new shadows within it. In this case, I actually muted all of them evenly, and I did it with only 3 lights, and I think that's actually cheaper than the other option, right? So thinking about it in terms of what style of lighting, would a bar of fill light on the front and the back work better at shadow reduction than tons and tons of modules? And the answer is
yes. And honestly, I probably would have assumed so, but I figured that you know, 4, 6, 8 modules, depending on whatever the size of the tank you have is, would have performed very similarly. It was surprising to see them perform so much poorer shadow-wise than this 2-light setup.
I would have thought, I mean, like we're testing the harshest environment, but I would have thought for sure that like the 4 primes would have behaved the same.
Yeah, right.
Okay, there is another option. We'll call the T5s. There's no shadow, man. It just doesn't exist. There's a plate sitting right underneath it and a bunch of bars, man. It just doesn't exist. Right?
This one I could have guessed.
I could have guessed this as well.
Right.
I've seen this before.
Right.
Okay, but it's literally light is bigger than the object we're trying to illuminate. In our tanks, we call it the aquascape, and here it's a testing apparatus, and it just wraps around everything. And that's how we get, like, essentially the DLI question of get the most photons possible to the animal, right? It's not just 300 par, but how much of the tissue is receiving the 300 par? Because if it's half, it's not 300 par anymore, essentially, as averaged around the whole thing. Okay, so everybody would have guessed this one, but what would you guess that the Stratton, which is also from ATI, but a big LED panel, what do you think that would look like?
I would imagine because of the size of the panel, I mean, the Stratton is a huge light. It would perform very similar.
You wouldn't be wrong, right? So big, giant panel, you know, like almost the size of the tank, and it creates no shadow, wraps around every single thing in the tank. Now that you know it, you can't unsee it. You know for sure that this is what this is doing. We know that it's reducing the amount of energy provided to the coral. Now, you can say some other options are adequate or even good, but you definitely know what best looks like, right?
Yes.
So we can have the conversation of what best in terms of shadow performance and getting energy to the coral, no question. The larger the form factor, the better. However, there's another option. It's these Reef Bright strips, or really any of the strips that you use out there you can create your own fixture out of this thing.
This one surprised me. So I had assumed with the amount of strips, the shadowing would be minimal, but this minimal was very surprising.
Okay, so just like spoiler alert, when you get into some of the strips that we're testing, dude, you got almost the same performance of this with only 3 strips, including one of the strips that goes right across the middle of it, right? Almost the same performance using the strips. So essentially, if you want to have a whole bunch of strips, you're creating, an SPS tank. If you have just a couple of strips, you're going to create an LPS tank. You can mix it to your actual need or somewhere in the middle of that for a mixed tank.
Or if you start with frag, start with one, add another, add another.
Hate that idea. We've been saying that forever, man. But really, I think it breeds failure. I think it gets us into complacency that what we had when there were little teeny animals this big was good enough.
Sure. So it's working. It's still working. It's still working.
And then,
but to what extent?
How do you know? How would you define when it's no longer working to the point that I should go buy that light?
That's a very good point.
Okay. Now there is the obvious caveat of budget. So like, hey man, if I just don't have the money to buy all that, so be it, right? But I can also know where I'm going and plan for it. I don't have to wait until animals are actually dying, because literally, like, I could lose just a couple of corals and it cost me the whole damn light.
Yep.
Right? And worse yet, if like the little frags now are like colonies that, are worth a lot more. Like one of those colonies are probably worth the cost of your whole light, right? If not more, right? So why wait till then? Okay, so strip lights, big lights, 3-point lighting, all of them going to reduce shadows more than just a single modular light or even multiple modulars. All right, cost of light. So this one is also, like, for me, we shared this in the 2020, showdown, lighting showdown for the first time, right? It's called cost per par. So I was surprised how a lot of these lights performed. But cost per par, basically what we do is we take 108-point measurements throughout this entire tank, right? So at the bottom, the middle, the top, we take all these different measurements, and then we average them out. So it's like the average par throughout this tank. And then we divide that by the cost of the light to essentially get cost per par. Now what that does is change the conversation from I don't want a $600 light, I don't want a $300 light, I don't want a whatever, $100 light, to how much par do I need and how am I going to get it the most efficiently?
Right.
And that is the part that, like, I feel like, again, in the innovation cycle, is we got to change the conversation, not from is this light good enough to do what I need to do, or the conversation could be, what is it that I need to do? Will this light achieve that? Instead of the reverse.
Right, exactly.
Okay, and we're going to give you tons and tons of data on how to select, which style of light, or like what par needs, and like how many points throughout the tank, and which lights get all those points throughout the tank to be able to achieve different standards. You'll see that in this series as well. But again, cost of the light divided by the average par. Okay, so the reality of this thing is there some of them that are $1.87 per par. There are others here that are almost $5 per par, right? So would you ever pay 2.5 times for the power output of something down at the bottom?
It would have to have 2.5 times performance, at least.
Yeah.
At least. I mean, there's an extent, right? Like I'll pay extra for programming features or whatever it might be, but the point of no return, like where do I hit that?
So the way they say it a lot of times, man, is like you got your economy car. Like this is the cheapest possible thing that'll get me to work.
Yep.
Right. And then there's like the upgrade. Like this thing is actually going to turn on for the next 10 years, and get me to work reliably. I'll pay extra for that, right? And often it might be like a linear return. Like I might spend twice as much money to get twice as much reliability and comfort or whatever.
Sure.
Right? And then there's like, the next luxury side. That one might cost 50% more and only be 10% better.
Right.
Like squeaking out that last bit. Okay, so here is the thing, when you see all of this stuff, you would think that is where the conversation's gonna go, is essentially the crappiest to the best.
I would assume
not.
this is white and there's no programming and it's gonna look terrible.
some of the best options that I believe that you will see in this test, that you come to your own conclusions. But make sure to match them up against this, because some of these options, man, are just like way, way, way cheaper than you would have thought, price per par.
We've been doing this a very long time. I've been proven wrong and had a change of opinion more times on this subject than I think any.
Okay, so that is one of the things that they talk about, is the early adopters, right? So there's the innovators and then there's the early adopters. So the early adopters, like, those are actually the thought leaders of our hobby. These are the people that we're all listening to, right? And so if, like I think there's a responsibility attached to that.
Yep.
We better be correct.
Yes.
Right? There's a high onus on how correct you are on those things, because so many people are listening. People are watching us, right? So, like, if you identify yourself as an early adopter, man, like, really think about, like, how, you know, your opinion and how you share it with other people affects things. Because I wouldn't have thought that you could get, you know, prior to doing the testing, some of the best available options for the cheapest. Now, I will tell you, some of the expensive options here do have things about them. You might say, oh yeah, that's for me. That's the extra 20% that was worth the whole thing.
Right. Do I want a touch screen in my car instead of a knob?
So, but the big piece here is not brand affinity. Like, I love that brand over another brand. I like the data and what it tells me it's going to get me and what cost that's going to come at. All right, position of light. This one is, this one actually transformed the way I look at a lot of these lights, because we used to think about it as just mounting height, right?
Always.
Okay, there's so much more that goes into mounting height than I would have ever thought, and it makes you learn so much more about how this is going to perform in your tank. Okay, so what happens if you mount the lights too low?
Oh, we can see it here. So hotspots.
Essentially, this creates a little laser beam in the tank. Essentially, the amount of light output here is the same as here, except for here it's spread out over 10 times the area, right? And so this could be 100 par, and this could be 1,000, right? And that's the way that these things work. When you have these little modules shooting out these cones of light, you end up with that, especially when they are mounted too low. However, this is what that looks like. Okay, so it's odds with something I'll share with you in just a second. But this is what that looks like. So mounted at, the test that we performed, I should share first, is the way that we're going to measure this thing is we're going to measure the 4 center pieces in our center points of the center. So like a 4-inch circle right underneath the light. And we want that to be within 30% of the average of the entire tank. Now, that is not going to create perfection. It's not going to be even across the entire thing. What we're going to eliminate, though, is the hot spots that are likely to cause mortalities. Right? So all the things you're seeing is we want within 30% of the center within the average of the entire top of the tank. So that means right here with this light that the center is 227 times percent higher. So if it was 100 par and it was an LPS tank in the center, man, it is actually 227 par. Oh no, 300. It's 207 something higher. So more than 2 times higher. Okay, but down at 8 inches, we hit our goal. And our goal is at 29%. So it's even at about 9 inches. Now, a lot of these things actually match fairly close to the manufacturer setting, but you'll start to see something here that you didn't expect in just a second. The other problem is, well, why don't I just keep raising it then? Because it clearly got better in your slope. You know, it keeps getting better and better and better until, you know, at 14 inches, it's within 6%. You know, I can just keep raising this light up and it just gets more and more and more even, right? All right, when you raise it up too high, what happens?
Well, I want to see my tank, so it's probably in the same room as my TV, so it's going to shine in my eyes.
And spill all over the floor and wall.
And just waste all of the money that I paid for the lights, because I'm wasting all of this over here.
Okay, there still is a hot spot, by the way. The hot spot's right here, though. It's in the air. This is where it's 1,000 par. This is now where it's 100 par. This right here is now like 70 par, because half of it's spilling out over here, right?
Well, what I usually don't see people say, rather, is that they'll have multiple colonies growing well, right? And they'll have 1 or 2 or 3 frags or colonies that aren't growing well, and almost every time you assume it's water quality. Something is wrong with the water quality, or it's the coral, or the coral's adapting. It could just be a shadowed spot. Maybe you see it, maybe you don't.
Well, another thing to think about is right here, where these 2 lights overlap. you know, if this was 100 par, this is 100 par, this is now 200, right? And so we create another hot spot in here. So thinking about the positioning light and how it goes, not just the height, but all around. All right, so that's in case we also had the same goal, which is let's reduce or not reduce it more than 30%. So let's retain 70% of the light in there. We found that at about 8 inches as well, which makes 8 inches the perfect height for this light. Okay, this is the surprise piece that we found, right? Some of them have a distribution curve that's almost non-existent, right? I mean, even at 1 inch off the tank, it's only 81% higher in the center. Like we mounted it literally at 1 inch off the tank, and the center's only at 81% higher than the average, right? Okay, there's no curve here, man. Like if I got this at 8 inches, and let's say I just like really screwed it up and went all the way down to 5 inches, like I was off by 3 inches and I just like winged it. I'm only really, our goal is 30, man. It's at 42. It's only 12% difference, man. This isn't really that big of a problem.
Right.
Okay, you know what this is? Guess what kind of light that is?
Strip light.
No.
No?
Close though. It's the strip light of old.
Oh, okay.
T5s, right?
Okay.
Okay, so by the way, T5s are also a strip light. They just come in a fluorescent tube. So they're really like 8 strips just combined together.
So really I was technically right.
Yes, the strip light of old. Okay, so this light is different, however. So we found that the best distribution was found at 13 inches, way over here, right? But it also, the best efficiency was at 11 inches, which means I can't actually get both of these things right at the same time, right? So we ended up calling these like suboptimal mounting heights, where these aren't true, okay? But look what happens if I go 5 inches below where we ended up, man. I'm at 135. Not 42, not just 12% higher than the goal, man. If I'm missing it just by a couple of inches, this like really a painful curve, and it's probably going to cause mortalities in the tank, and I'll just shrug my shoulders because visually I can't see it. But I don't know if stuff's dying. I guess
Or
I didn't
maybe
know.
testing, hoping to find something.
Yep, and some of you might be saying, oh, well, I'd notice. Well, yeah, but like you're one of the lucky experienced few. They're all the people that are doing this for their first time or even their second time. They just notice stuff's dying. And in fact, in many cases, the old world, they were turning the lights up hoping because they wasn't getting enough light. It caused problems even worse, man. You're magnifying every mistake you make is magnified now through the hot spot here. If you don't nail this, right? Okay, so that's why I called this forgiving. Like this is part of the reason why you can take like a T5 fixture and just throw it in the tank and walk away.
Right.
Done. Like lighting it solved, man, right? I mean, it's old technology filled with mercury bulbs, and like nobody's buying these things. And by say nobody's buying these things, like it's not totally true, because I went and looked. Do you know how many fixtures that we bought, we sold here in the last 5 years?
Oh, I don't.
Okay, in the last 5 years, we have sold 500 T5 fixtures. Okay, it might sound like a lot, it's not. And you're gonna figure out why in a second. How many T5 bulbs do you think that people bought?
Oh, 6 times 500.
100,000, dude.
Yeah. Wow.
100,000,
Okay.
man, right? Okay, so just so you know, people aren't buying the fixtures anymore. All of those people that are using those bulbs are old schoolers, man. Like these are people that have been successful for a long time and here to tell the tale, right? And the 500 people are the people that were wise enough to listen to them, right? And so these things are so forgiving. I can tell a new person, man, just throw this big panel of light on top of the tank and you're golden, man, no problem.
Right.
Okay, this one, like what if I was a brand new reefer? I would never know, man, what you just talked about.
Never.
And so we start to bridge into that gap of like why people had so many challenges with LEDs. It's not the tool, man, it's how you use the tool. But in this case, requires par meter. This one requires common sense. I don't know, it looks good. Really. Okay. This is interesting though. So this was the sun power, right? And it was even. We talked about how even it was. But it doesn't have to be T5s, right? It just doesn't. Because this is the ATI Stratton. And like, by the way, we've been working on this for like 3 to 4 months. There are, just for the height test alone, we had to do 50 lights at 14 different heights. It's like over 600 different sets of par meters, like whole apparatus of sets. And then we did the actual mounting heights. Like we've been into this for 3 or 4 months to be able to get the data. When we started this, the ATI Stratton existed. No, it doesn't. it sucks because actually it's performed really, really well in this.
Yeah, I mean, you can see them here next to each other.
They're identical. I mean, the ATI SunPower and the ATI Stratton, the LED version and the T5 version are identical. Like they produce almost the exact same spread and mounting height. It was off just by a few percent and 1 inch of mounting height, but like really, really nitpicky. And like you couldn't mess either one of these up. I mean, you just mount it wherever you want. Okay, but this is actually one of the interesting ones. This is what we call a sweet spot. So this is where we find both of these things to be true. This is where we find both that the hotspot has shrunk down to less than 30%, and we've also haven't lost 30% of the light yet, and sometimes it creates a window, 3, 4, or 5 inches or whatever, more commonly about 2 or 3. But in this case, this was a modular fixture, LED strips, 5 LED strips put together, and can you read the bottom number there?
So we've got 0 inches. I don't think I've ever even thought about mounting a light at 0 inches.
It's literally flush with the tank. Literally, like it's on the glass, you know, not suspended. You can't even see it because it's recessed a little bit. Okay, in that case, man, we have 20%. Even with it just 0 inches, 4 inches in the center, man, is the same as the average, or within 27%. And it's that way everywhere. So if you're talking about forgiving, bam, that's it.
Well, the possibilities of something like this, right? So if I have to mount the light to the tank, I have to leave room for my wall, or if I want to hang it, I have to drill. But if I have something that's recessed and sits above the water, I don't see it. I can put the tank flush up against the wall if I wanted to. Like, there's so much that goes into that.
Okay, so if I had asked you yesterday, I'm talking to all of you guys, and you, if I had asked you yesterday, is a strip light innovative?
No.
No, I mean, it's like a supplemental light or something, right?
No, likely I would have never chosen one for my own tank.
Okay, but if I have if I have an option, like if I'm talking about this from a technology perspective, and one of these options, you know, has a huge, huge peak, and I have to nail it, and it's not even really optimal. Like we're calling it suboptimal. And then one of them, it literally doesn't matter where you mount it. It's going to retain 30% of the light and have even distribution almost anywhere you put it. Which one would you describe as innovative and going to help reefers be more successful?
So this is the one of the subjects I was completely wrong on. Clearly, this is the way to go.
Okay, so it's in the data though. Like we could talk about this stuff all we want, and we have. We've talked about it for years. But it's in the data. When you collect it all together and interpret it, and like interpreting it, like just piecing it all together is one thing to just throw. It's like, this is actually one of the problems that we've had with BRStv Investigates in the past, is we did all of the lights on their own. So like, here's one light, everything we know about this light.
Sure.
And then a week later, here's everything we know about this light. But it's like really impossible, man, to collect all of that stuff together and look at it, man. You'd have to be the super nerd. You're definitely the 1%. You know, the innovators
right
at the bottom using that data. So how do we, you know, combine it? And that's what this series is all about. Let's take each one of these things and show how all the lights performed on that one thing so that we can compare them and pick the best options for ourselves. All right, quality of light. This is one of becoming my pet peeve because it's actually easier to understand, but nobody's willing to understand it because it's spectrum, and half of you just tuned out. Half of you just said, this isn't for me, I don't need to know about spectrum, and you were wrong, okay? So bear with me, and you can decide for yourself if I meet that standard, and like, call us out. I want you to call us out in the comments if this makes sense to you, or whether or not you think it just doesn't matter at all, right? Okay, so PAR is photosynthetically active radiation. PER is photosynthetically usable radiation. Usable being the key word there, right? So the reason there isn't a PER meter is because it really depends on the animal. It could be a plant. It could be a plant grown in different areas. In our case, it could be coral, but it could be coral grown at 10 feet. It could be coral grown at 30 feet deep. The light dynamics change.
Right.
You know, there isn't a specific number. But that doesn't mean that we can't measure the quality of the usable light that's there, because we can. All right. This conversation, though, I'm begging. This conversation right now is 100% aimed at the innovators and the early adopters, because like without like the community, looking into the thought leaders like yourselves, and having you spread out the information, as you believe it to be true, we're never going to get over the hump. It's just stalled here. And the reason I think it's stalled is because this is such a complex topic that doesn't need to be complex. It's actually pretty easy. And if we can just share the easy way to think about it, we can get over the hump and not talk about the lights that exist today, but make sure all the lights to come meet a better standard for all of us. Because there are good, better, and best ways to do this, and some might just call adequate.
Right.
All right. So the first way that I look at this, and now I'm going to say this actually, people don't like this, but the science on this just doesn't exist. The science doesn't exist on providing light in an aquarium where the light source is just inches off the top of it. Like most marine biologists are, doing the ocean. They're not doing our aquariums. And so much of this stuff is dependent on each other, and not all of it is completely understood, right? So at some point, man, you just have to take all the things that you know and assemble them together to be something that you believe to be true.
Right. Okay. Well, and not only do I want it to perform, I want it to look good. I don't, me personally, I don't want a bare yellow tank that grows coral really well that I don't even want to look at.
I think that's where that most people actually are. So they're adjusting the sliders and stuff based on like what they want it to look like, right?
Yeah.
Okay, the good news is you can actually do that, right? And I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist to be able to do it. You just have to know what you're doing when you do that. And have a light that's kind of designed to not let you catastrophically mess it up.
And before today, I did not know what I was doing.
I think that there's not just you. I think there's a bunch of people out there probably saying, I just never seen it this way.
Well, and even T5s, I'm switching, coral plus, blue plus, purple plus, just whichever one looks good. T5 is really easy, right? We just said they're forgiving, but I don't really know.
Yep.
I'm just going with what looks good.
So this is what I believe. You can decide whether or not you believe what I believe here, but come along for the ride. All right, so the first thing I would look at when I'm deciding what I believe from spectrum is what kind of light are they exposed to in the ocean. Now, it's commonly referenced that all the red and everything is gone as you get deeper, but the reality is there's not like a whole lot of corals that are collected at 99 feet for our tanks. There are probably some, but like it's not a very efficient place to dive to. So just from that basis alone, there's probably not a lot. And if they are, dude, they're going to be ungodly expensive, right? Okay, so, but there's not probably a lot of corals even at 3 feet. There are probably some areas where you can collect them at 3 feet. At 3 feet, you're still seeing red. So this is the sun, basically even amount of everything. You're starting to lose some of the red here. At 16 feet, at 15 feet deep in the ocean, you've lost most of the red. You're eating into some of the yellows, getting a little thinner. At 30 feet, now you've lost all the red. Red like really isn't a lot of light there. And most of the light now is in this blue to green range. Now the reason I say this is because this is what like the corals have evolved to live under, right? Probably somewhere in between here for the most part. Really the answer is all of it, man, because like the corals, you don't know where the corals came from. They came from all these things. So think about what the type of light they're exposed to, and most of the time, most of the corals are going to be predominantly this green and blue range. So like that isn't going to tell you what the right part is, but it's a nice way to start the conversation about, well, if it's exposed to that, it probably adapted to use it. Sure enough, it did. And so there are three things here. There are three things that in that coral, they actually utilize light, right? And you've looked at one of these charts before and said, I don't know what the hell I'm looking at, and checked out. Check back in for a second. Because there's really three things here that matter to the coral from an energy production standpoint. There's other conversations to be had about spectrum, but for an energy production standpoint, there's chlorophyll A, which we know that no coral can live without. All corals are dependent on chlorophyll A to survive. Right? And so we have a little peak. This little yellow line here is where the corals actually absorb light, right? We're gonna get to this red thing in a second, but this is where they absorb light. And so if I was thinking about feeding chlorophyll A essentially, well, you know what? There's a healthy amount of spectrum here in that range that chlorophyll A is in. It's reasonable to believe that I'm providing energy efficiently. And so the reality is even over here, it's collecting some light, but not efficiently. This is where it's collecting the most light possible. All right, so if I was gonna choose a light on chlorophyll A alone, like the one thing that these corals need, I got two options. I could pick the one that I just talked about right here, which has tons and tons of spectrum within that chlorophyll range. And it's not important that it looks exactly like that shape, by the way. It's important that it has photons in that range that can provide energy to chlorophyll A. So it might be even more advantageous if it wasn't as peaky tall, but it was just wider. Now, there's a lot of debate to be had in there, but my point is that it just needs to be healthy amount within the range that science tells us is where chlorophyll A turns light into energy. But then there's this one. This one almost completely misses chlorophyll A. There's just a little teeny bit of representation over here. Now, I'll tell you why that the coral probably will still be able to survive off that in just a second. But if I were going to pick a light that was one is better than another one, which one would you pick?
Oh, every time.
Okay, which one would you pick? Now that you know, I think 100 out of 100 reefers, like throw like cost and stuff out the window. You're just looking for the best, because what we want to look for is the best and then the costs like in that. So let's not chase the cheapest options out there. Let's chase out the best options and find which ones of those are the cheapest, because you might find they're the same, right? Okay, in this case, I probably wouldn't pick this one based on that alone, but just because it has that. But why don't all these corals just wither and die if this doesn't happen? It's chlorophyll C2. Okay, chlorophyll C2 is known as an accessory pigment. So what it does is it expands the range that it collects light. So instead of being way over here, it's now way over here, right? It's in this like a little bit of the lighter blue into what we call the royal blue peak, right? Okay, so now it's going to collect energy and essentially pass it back to chlorophyll A. There's a lot of things going on here, but the accessory pigment, this is the general conversation of how it's going to collect light. Okay, so chlorophyll C2, now we've expanded the amount of light that it's available to. And we said that it's available to all those light from the sun. This is how it's utilizing a wider range. And we kind of think about, I'm going to butcher the DLI thing again, but like it's not just the amount of PAR, it's the PAR where it can collect it. Now, if we add this in, it can collect it more efficiently and add more energy to the coral again, right? All right. So here's the reality of it. You don't have to worry about C2. You know why?
I don't, actually.
Okay, because C2 is the same peak as cool whites and royal blues, at least the ones used in our industry.
Okay.
Every single light out there has some version of royal blue and cool light, white in there. I don't think you could buy a light that does this one poorly. You'd have to go hunt it down, right? So the good news is C2 you don't have to really worry about, okay? This is the carotenoids. I'm going to butcher this word, but the pyridinidin. Pyridinidin, okay. Pyridinidin is one of the carotenoids that collects energy as well. This is the primary one, right? Okay, and this is the outline for it, right? It goes further into this blue energy. So what we're doing is expanding yet again the range that we can collect energy and pass it back to chlorophyll A essentially. In fact, there's these things called PCPs, which are pyridinidin chlorophyll compounds, right? Okay. Where they actually combine together and create big wide bands where they collect energy and give it back to the coral. So sometimes it's not just that these things are by themselves, but that they collect together. All right, so in that case, yet again, we could take this light here, right? This light here has a healthy amount of this blue light in it, and this one doesn't. So now based on energy collection alone, and I was going to go out and pick a light, let's pretend they're the same price, because in some cases they actually are. Which one of these lights would you buy?
Still.
It's still that one.
Wider.
That's actually a different LED. The other one was a T5 one. This is an LED.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. So that's the technology here. Is it's not just like a magic photon coming out of a fluorescent tube. It's like you're wondering why like some of these lights like perform better. The technologies like people are like diehard T5 fans or diehard LED fans. There's not like magic little photons coming out that are so much better than other ones. It's how you use the technology, and you can see like we're just not using it right in many cases.
Well, I mean, I've seen spectrographs in the years and years I've been here, and I don't think I've ever chosen or purchased a light, looked at the graphs, because I don't know what I'm looking at.
You wouldn't know. How would you know? This is that bit that I told you about, which is, we're going to go back to it. the innovators and early adopters. I just didn't know. I didn't know what I was trying to shoot for, okay? So this is how I put this all together. So for me, I'm gonna put this together in terms of, I'm thinking about what the sun provides, I'm thinking about what the biology tells me that is probably right for it. I'm also gonna think about, though, the technology that has produced the most results. Like in my ecosphere, what is producing the most results? And I'm gonna tell you that lights like this one, where is it? This one right here has produced some of the best results I've seen anywhere. And you can tell that it's T5s because it has this weird little mercury bump here. Okay, so like in that spirit, like of all that we sold, I told you we sold 100,000 ATI bulbs, you know, that brand alone, inside of the last 5 years. These, I'm telling you, are the people that have been around forever. Mm-hmm. They've been around, they're having success, and there's no reason to change what they're doing. But nobody's buying new T5s. There's only 500 fixtures that were bought in the same period of time. So, but what is it we learn from that so that we can say, these are the intersections, the wide blue band between 410 and about 484, where the peaks are for the pyridinoin and the chlorophyll A. Or actually it's the shoulder peak on chlorophyll A. How do I find that wide blue band that produces success? Because I think it matches the ocean. I think that it matches biology. I think it matches successful reefers out there. But also, for me personally, I give them recommendations based on the things that I've experienced in my own life, doing this for 20 years. And this is my T5 tank, using ATI bulbs. You know, this is my first attempt, my first crack at this, like almost 20 years ago, 2004. Filled it with SPS, I filled it up as a mixed tank, doing really, really well. The BRS 160. This thing, this was wide blue spectrum. Wide blue spectrum with the BRS 160 because we're using Kessels. Kessels have the wide blue spectrum that the A360X is known for. It's also got the T5 ATI bulbs, wide blue spectrum. The E170, same exact thing, man, just a slightly different form factor using the Aquatic Life T5 bulbs and the Kessel Light, wide blue spectrum. And then there's the hybrid 750. If you were here, if you go back and watch any of the updates in this video, like, is there any question that the 750 is the nicest looking tank here?
No, it's one of the nicest tanks I've ever seen.
It has surpassed the BRS 160 for sure. Yes. And in this case, what we're using is the wide blue spectrum from the Radion G6s. There's 4 of them over a 6-foot tank, turned perpendicular to eliminate shadows, super wide angles, the wide spectrum. And so for me, when I'm getting into wide blue spectrum and why I would recommend this to other people is because the people I know, the people that shop here, science, biology, and my own experience, all comes to one thing. And like very, very, very little that comes outside of it. So hopefully that is how we get to the innovators and their early adopters. Embrace it. Because if we don't embrace that there are better options and ask for them to actually be at the same cost so you don't have to pay for all of them, we'll never get over the hump and we will always have those other things. All right, color potential of light. This is the exact same conversation. Right?
So this one, I had no idea. I wasn't right or wrong. I just had no clue about it.
Okay, this is something too. Like it dawned on me when somebody asked me one day, "Why is a leaf green?"
I'm gonna let you explain it. But it was when you say it's so simple, right? Like they teach this in 3rd grade.
Yeah. Okay, because it absorbs all of the other light. Mm-hmm. It's getting the sun, so it's getting yellow, red, orange. It's getting blue light. It absorbs all of that for photosynthetic energy, and then reflects the green back at your eye. Green light hits it, bounces off, hits your eye, looks green. The reason it doesn't look blue is because it absorbed the blue and utilized it, right? Okay, so the same thing's happening in our corals as well. So this thing here is just a cool white coral, right? This is a light under cool white. The reason that it looks yellow is because we got yellow light on it, we have orange light on it, red light and green, and it all kind of combines together to create like a muddy look in the tank, right? All right, so here's the thing about it. This is why that color looks all that color. But this is the custom peak. So when we blended all the colors together, it produced this. Now I can tell you, how many people would prefer this coral? And how many people prefer this one? So we've done this in a different seminar, like the one NASA. You can go look for that talk if you want. But here's the bit that probably a lot of people just didn't understand, is if you don't have green in the spectrum, you don't get green. If there's no green light in there, it can't reflect at your eye. If you don't have violet light, you just don't get the violet color, because the coral probably has violet pigment. It just can't reflect it at your eye because you don't even give it the light.
It's simple. It's so simple. But
Yeah.
I've never thought about it. So in my tank here, right, I have a coral that looks like this and a bunch of other coral that looks great. But I think of my tank holistically as one, grouping of corals. So people will walk by and, is this coral dying? What's wrong with this coral? It's been growing. It just looks terrible for months. And I never thought to adjust the individual peaks of the light.
So it could be that that's just the way that coral looks. It could also be that your light just doesn't have that color spectrum in it, right? And that means that we're talking oranges. Like look at like the Kessel. When you turn on their red, which is a little bit more orangey, all of a sudden the anthias in the tank just explode, man, because they are orange, right? They're that orangey red color, and bam, and all of a sudden they just explode in the tank. They look so beautiful, right? Okay, it wasn't that the fish didn't have that color. We just didn't have the light turned on to highlight that color. Right? And so that could be all of these colors, though. It could be violet. It could be like a deeper blue, the lighter blue, the green, yellow, orange, red. Now there is one complication to this.
What's that?
It's called fluorescence, right? Fluorescence is a different thing. It's when light comes in these blue spectrums and it's absorbed, and then it re-emits it back out as a different color, right? So it re-emits it, takes the blue in and spits it back out as yellow or orange or whatever. If you want to know that if your corals have fluorescence, it's super simple. Go turn on only the royal blue LEDs and see what doesn't look blue, because it all should only look blue. You've only highlighted it with blue light. It should all look blue. The only thing reflected back off those pigments. But if it looks green or yellow or orange or red, what that is fluorescence. It's absorbing that color and then re-emitting it out back in a different color. Think about it like your black lights on like a poster or whatnot.
Sure.
You hit it with that UV light, it absorbs that high energy light and then re-emits it out as a super bright color, right? That's what's happening here. Now one of the things though that's happening here too is different ranges of this are responsible for different fluorescent proteins too. Which means that if you don't have the right range of blue in here, you may just not get yellow fluorescence. You may not just get red or green fluorescence. Or you may not get it to the same degree. And in that NASA one, we actually showed which of these, that same coral, hit with all of these different lights. And you can see all the different variations of, it wasn't the coral, it was how I utilized the light. Now here's the good news. The good news is the wide blue spectrum that we just talked about is the same thing here. This wide blue spectrum that makes the coral look awesome is actually the carotenoid peak 1, the shoulder peak, the C2, the A, and the carotenoid. So in this case, what's doing right by the animal happens to be what's doing right for us. Now that you know, would you want the thin little teeny spectrum or do you want a wide blue band?
Oh, why? Of course.
Okay, if we're going to talk about what's best, which one is it?
Still.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
still.
Would it be better if best was also amongst the cheapest? Because that's always the conversation. It always goes back to, well, of course it's going to be better, but it's going to cost me money. But be open-minded, because two things. There are options out there right now where that isn't the case, and you're going to be able to see them. Two, like from the innovative companies, the ones that are designing new things, the ones that you're seeing a lot of the innovation from today, that is where it trickles down into the other areas. But the problem is within that line of innovation, let me actually pull this back up here. Within the line of innovation, who's buying these lights? It's these people. the early and late majority, man. Laggards, they're still using that rotary phone, right? And the early adopters and innovators, nobody would design for them, man, because they're only like, these guys are DIYing it, and this one's only 13%. They're designing it for the early and late majority, which is 70% of the market. So if we want these things to be more widely available and not have to like think about good, better, best as like just tied to how much it costs, if we as early adopters go out there and share the information of what really does make best, it will make the manufacturers make it that way.
Right.
As long as we're willing to buy it in a different, like, I'm gonna just say, worse format, well, they're just gonna keep making it that way because it's easier.
Right, exactly.
All right, so that is what you're going to see. There's going to be 8 of these episodes on lighting. Tomorrow, you're going to see, I'm gonna give them a secret. We're gonna see the first one come out. But at the end, there's like a little secret playlist. If you want to watch the other 2 episodes in it, the first 2 of the actual data, hit the link at the end of it, and you'll be able to see the shadow performance test. And you'll also be able to see the price per par, the cost of all of these lights in there. And then every Friday after that, we're going to release 1 more of these. So we are going to get to the bottom of lighting. We're going to have the conversation that needs to be had, which is what is innovative and how do we promote it to everybody else?
Well, the key is questioning it, right? I mean, the first time we discussed this, right away I questioned what is the purpose of this stand, right? Like why the bars, why the plate? Like you're never going to have that in a tank. But then you think about it, it could be a plating coral, it could be a chunk of rock, it could be the coral on itself.
I think the shadow one, that one is the easiest to digest by far, and probably one of the most impactful and easiest to solve. And what's cool about the shadow one is how when you add the supplement bars to the lights you already own, you can solve it. So like a lot of times when you're like, I don't want to watch one of these things because all it does is make me mad and make me want to throw out everything I've already bought. Okay, you don't have to do that. You can actually just take the things you already have and make them better.
Right.
And in fact, like you may look at the panel lights here and say that these, like from a biology standpoint, probably beat anything. Well, for me, I want a balance of what looks good in the tank and what's good for the biology. I want both, right?
Well, there's even more to that, right? I want it to look good in my home.
And good in your home. Yeah, I want to look at the tank and say, man, it looks awesome. It doesn't look crappy on my floor. It doesn't look blinding me.
Yep.
Okay, and for me, the 3-point hybrids is usually where I land because I have one primary light source that usually creates some amount of shimmer in the tank, and then I use the fill lights to fill in for the biology, either supplementing spectrum I didn't have or supplementing photons that are now hitting areas that were dark in the coral before. So you can decide for yourself which one of these things speaks to you, but do it using data. We've got 50 some lights. I think it's 54 lights and configurations of lights that we tested. You get to see them all, and do me a favor. Share in this video, if you found this thing to be valuable. If you think these things would shape how you would buy the light, and then more importantly, in the actual episodes, like challenges. The test is designed every time to get better. I think it was better than last time.
Yep.
But
absolutely.
like this is where the innovation and the early adopters happen, man. This is how we push the hobby forward. Right now, I feel like we're a little bit stuck. We have to decide what we want, and then the manufacturers will make it. Jason?
I agree. There's going to be a lot of people playing with their sliders on their lights tonight after this.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us. We have 2 hours going into putting this together. Hopefully, the presentation anyway.
That was good.
Hopefully, it made a little sense to you guys. And we'll see you with the first episode tomorrow, and maybe one on Friday as well.
Awesome.
See you then.
All right.